It's time for love. It's time for your love coach. Let's find out if you're ready for love. Here's your marvelous host, Nikki Lee.
Hello, and welcome to Ready for Love Radio. This is your host and love coach, Nikki Lee. Emotions. You know, to a lot of people, that can be a dirty word. And it seems like there's two ways we have our emotions. We either try to suppress our emotions and hide them from everybody, or they're on full display for people. And we kind of let our emotions run us. So we either hide them or they're all over the place, and we don't really know how to deal with or manage our emotions. So is that how our emotions have to be, or is there another option? Now, we all know that we meet some people, and it seems like they either don't have any emotions, or maybe, just maybe, could it be that they have learned a secret to manage and handle their emotions? Is that possible? Well, my guest today is Korte. And you know what? I think she can help us learn more about that. I think she can help us learn that how our emotions work and how we maybe can get a better handle on them. What do you think, Kim? Is that possible?
I do, Nikki. Thank you for having me.
You know, I looked over your information, and I love, so many of us own our own business, and so we're called the CEO, and normally that's a Chief Executive Officer, but you call it the Chief Emotions Officer. I love that. That is so cool. Why? How'd you come up with that name?
Well, it was easy because I used to tell people you're the CEO of your life, and the focus of emotions, especially in business, is just not there. It's starting to become more, but there's been how many years? 25 years of emotional intelligence training, and it's still not being really incorporated into business. And it doesn't matter if you're a business of one or a business of hundreds of thousands. We are emotion beings.
Yeah.
There's anyone who says that they don't feel, no, that's not true. We all feel. And
this
so
is true.
Chief Emotions Officer helps highlight that.
I like that. Well, and the thing is, you have to feel. Now, you don't have to go overboard with it. Like I said, you don't have to make it on full display for everybody, especially, being overly emotional. But we are emotional beings, and we do have feelings. And in business, we have to have feelings to some degree. We have to. But yeah, that's an interesting point. I like that. So,
well, go ahead. Sorry.
Give us a little bit of your background. How did you get into this? Was this what you always planned to do when you were a little girl?
No, it was not what I planned. In fact, I'm a very process-oriented person. I had a business I was in accounting for many years. Then I became a consultant and implemented accounting systems, and then focused mainly on, it's called Procure to Pay, which is basically a workflow system to automate invoice approval. And I just have this kind of a brain. It was only after a brutal divorce, and when I say brutal, I literally laid on the floor of my condo for I don't know how long because I was so devastated. And it was only after I got up and realized that there was a lot of things that had gone wrong. I wasn't paying attention. I didn't want to feel this way again. So I turned myself into a project. And I first focused on thinking, because isn't that what everybody says to do to manage emotions? Manage your thoughts. So I thought, okay, this will do it. And it didn't really work. And it wasn't until I discovered the theory of constructed emotions that I came up with a concept for myself or a framework, and I now teach that framework because I realize how powerful it is. And it's based on the most current neuroscience, so it's not like I just made something up out of a hat. There is a theory that we construct our emotions.
Well, you know, I often joke that I'm a work in progress and have been, especially since I got my certification for coaching, because I learned so much about myself while going through the training, which I didn't expect that. But I'm glad I did. And I call my name Love Coach. I figured that when I started the training to be a coach, it was going to be a journey. You know, I was beginning the training, and I just felt that it was going to be a new journey in my life, and I didn't know where it was going to take me. I really had no clue how much the trajectory of my life was going to change with it. So it became much more prophetic than I realized. But I like I said, I often joke that my life is a work in progress. So I hadn't really ever thought about the fact that I was making my own life a project. But work in progress and life being a project is pretty much the same idea, don't you think?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, if we are not progressing, if we are not trying to manage the project, like you were saying before, the project manages us, and so we go off into every direction. The thing is that these experiences, whether we curate them or not, they mold who we are, and they mold how we feel. They mold how we respond and to the world and to life. So it's a matter of do you want to manage the project or do you not?
Right. Well, you know, I say too that, you know, I actually was just having this conversation with my brother. He's from here in Virginia, always been around here and that kind of thing. And he just married a really nice Latino woman from Colombia, and she moved here. And so Virginia, you know, rural living country guy. Well, okay, I don't dare call him a country girl guy, or he'll come back here and clobber me. But you know, somebody that's used to living in a rural area just married somebody that's a fiery Latino woman, and cultures are clashing. You know, so he's learning about her culture, she's learning about his culture, and it's interesting. And I was laughing so hard I was crying with him telling me stories about the two of them, and you know, her being used to her way and him being used to his way. You know, and I told him, I said, this is a fantastic opportunity for you to grow as a person and learn new things and this thing, you know, and that's fantastic to do that kind of thing, and like I said, to grow as a person, you know. And I've got this theory that if we aren't growing by learning new things, experiencing new things, and this kind of thing, our life becomes stagnant. What do you think about that?
Well, actually, a big part of what I teach is around brain health, because if our brains are not healthy, and being treated with the proper care, then your emotions are much harder to manage. And we misfire. I can get into that a little bit more later as to what I mean. But they know now that if you are not learning, if you are not expanding and growing intellectually and being exposed in social, you are more susceptible to Alzheimer's and to dementia. So it's not just, it's a health crisis for us right now. And part of it could be that we are not growing and learning and being social enough. So your brother's improving his brain health by having another culture in his house. Awesome.
That makes a lot of sense, actually, because that's the whole cliche use it or lose it kind of thing. We've got to stay active, not just physically, but mentally as well. Well, what about last year when the schools were closed? And kids were, quote unquote, learning from home, and you saw so many problems, and their grades were slipping so bad, and this kind of thing, and they needed some kids just needed a certain sort of learning, and couldn't make the switch to remote learning, and were having so many problems. So interesting. All right, good information. And I've been thinking about suggesting something for my dad, and I think you just prompted me to go ahead and push that to get my brother to do that.
Yeah.
So
get him to learn another language. That'll really help. That's one of the things.
Well, I've been
thinking Spanish so he can talk to his new daughter-in-law.
Yeah, I can see that now. Well, and he's always been very creative, but he hasn't done anything with that for years and years and years. And I was going to suggest some things that he might be able to do to stir that creativity again. I don't even think my brother even remembers it's been so long since he did anything creatively. But I was thinking that could be something good for him to tap back into. Interesting. Now, you've got a book called The Perfect Heart, Creating and Maintaining Love-Life Balance. Why did you decide to write a book?
I told you I'm about process, right?
Right.
And when my divorce first happened, I said, okay, where did I go wrong? And I looked at a couple of things. One was, and this is really to mindfulness, was that I just met him. I was in a really bad place emotionally, so that divorce was not the first emotional earthquake I had experienced. I had childhood inappropriate behavior with me. I don't want to trigger anybody, but it's not hard to figure it out. I also had a mother who was an alcoholic who died, and I was devastated by it. And I met my ex-husband about a year later, and this was when I was confronting the person who had been inappropriate and, reeling from my mom's death. So basically, I was a woman in an emotional down spiral, and he felt like the person to save me, right? My white knight. And
right.
So I realized that before I got into another relationship, I needed to be whole. And part of that was I needed to focus on what I was looking for in my next relationship. But I also saw that I didn't have good balance. And I created this heart-shaped Venn diagram. And basically it's two circles that overlap. So if you think about the chevron, the double circles, or the visa circles, and then a V at the bottom. So the circles represented myself and my partner, our time independently, and where they overlapped was our time together. And then below was the friends and family. So it was to represent how I spent my time. And I realized that I was my unhappiest when we spent too much time together, which I called the skinny heart, or when we spent very little time together, which I called the chubby heart, because it was wide apart because we had so little time together. And that was my entree into coaching. And I wrote that book because so many people love the idea of my heart and having a list of what to focus on when you're looking for somebody, or just helping people to focus and be mindful in relationships. So I wrote the book after much encouragement because it was a process.
Interesting. I like that idea of comparing your time together, your time apart. And I like that. I like that very much, actually, because that makes you kind of analyze the varieties and see how I like that very much, actually.
You know, I didn't know it at the time that I did all of this, but for 95% of our existence is on autopilot, meaning we use our past experience in order to do what we do, how we feel, what we think. All of these things are based on our past experience. We don't have to relearn how to drive. We don't have to relearn how to write. You know, the brain has all this. It's called neuronal wiring. And, you know, we sometimes forget, like, our wiring might not be very good. And that is what mindfulness is all about. And that's what this tool is all about, was to help us to be mindful. So not knowing that, but it dovetails into what I do today, because our emotions are pretty much on autopilot. So how do we make those adjustments? And so it was a good transition to go from the book into what I do today.
Very true. That really ties into the book I'm ghostwriting too. That was interesting. I like how all these different things that I do kind of all like tie into each other, and the ideas that spark for me. I like that. Very cool.
Good.
Yeah, it gets the mind working. So.
Which we need, right?
Well, it doesn't help me sleep better, but it gets the mind working at like the funniest times of the day too. So, and people wonder why I sleep such strange hours. I'm like, because the mind doesn't shut. I don't have an on-off switch. So, that's so strange. Plus, I deal with people like all around the world, so you never know what time I'll be up or down or whatever. So, interesting. All right. Fascinating. Okay, so emotional awareness. Now, see, I talk about awareness a lot here. Whether it's being aware of what's happening around us, being aware of our partner and, you know, what they need or what they need from us, even if they're okay. So why you're focused on emotional awareness, which I think is wonderful, but why are you focusing on that? Other than there's a need for it, why are you focusing on that?
Well, because there's let me just put it this way. We have a sense. It's called the eighth sense. And that eighth sense is called interoception. Interoception. Interoception is how we feel inside of our bodies. And it's how we are able to identify our emotions, our emotional responses. If you think about everything that you feel it in your body, and they've actually done bodily maps and asked people to map out how they feel different basic emotions, and it's very similar. So our emotions are felt inside of our body. So if we're able to connect to that feeling inside of us and to be able to identify the emotion, then that gives us that ability to recognize our emotions that much quicker. And when we are able to do that, that gives us the ability to recognize it and either take action of some sort, either just to recognize it or to do something about it. Like if we recognize fear, then we are able to do it. The problem is that our emotions are based on our history, right? We just talked about how the brain uses our past history for energy efficiency. So if we are not aware of our emotion, one, that's not great. But if we're not able to distinguish that it's right or wrong, that's another issue. So awareness isn't just feeling it inside of your body, which is key, but it's being able to make a distinction between our various emotion states. And what I mean by that, I'll use food because I use cooking analogies to help people kind of visualize and understand what I'm talking about. If you think of anger like a pepper can be very mild and sometimes almost sweet, and then it can be so spicy your eyes are watering, your mouth is on fire, and you're just running around trying to find milk or something to get the heat away. That's the equivalent to having a habanero is like fury or indignation, where if you are maybe having a pepper that's slightly spicy, that could be irked or irritated, where anger might be a jalapeno. So this idea of having this distinction in our emotions and our emotional responses is really critical, because what you're doing is you're managing your emotions from where they start, which is the recipes in our head, and giving your brain recipes in order to better identify them. Then the things that are produced from our emotions, which are our behaviors, our thoughts, our decisions, are more well-tuned and well-defined. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I like how you're tying it to food, because it makes it's interesting to have the examples to kind of tie it to. It's interesting that you're using foods instead, because usually people give us like pictures to think about or visuals, but the taste actually is an interesting contrast. So it's interesting that you're doing the different sort of tapping into a different sense. How about that?
Yeah, and so can we just for a minute, can I bring in taste?
Sure.
So flavor, what we have in the way of flavor is a combination of senses. It's a combination of visual, what we see, what we smell, and our sense of the sense of taste. But the flavor itself can be different. But it's this combination plus texture, because is it wet or is it dry? And our brain often predicts what we taste based on what we see, what we smell, what we, the texture of it, and we can get it wrong. And that's why a lot of people will taste things a couple of times. That's a prediction.
That's also predicted by the past, because we automatically think about what it tasted like last time we had it.
Exactly. And our emotions, and this is why I talk about the ingredients, and when I teach, the ingredients that we use to predict our emotions, because emotions are a sense. A lot of people don't realize this, but the brain predicts what we see, the brain predicts what we taste, the brain even predicts what we hear. That's why hearing and listening are two different things. There's a lot of prediction that takes place by the brain, and then the brain has prediction error that corrects it. So this same idea of flavor is also what I use for emotion, and this is why I talked about something that's really hot versus what isn't, because our emotions are equally a prediction by the brain. So if we are better at predicting, then we're better at managing.
Interesting. Well, and I haven't thought about it. I love when my guests make me think about things so differently. I hadn't thought about it, but foods impact us in so many ways. And like you said, they impact all of our senses before we eat it and after we eat it.
Yes. And it affects us emotionally.
Yeah, true.
Imagine how you feel I use kind of a flavor palette when I talk about emotions, and something that's really yummy and tasty, or you want to spit it out, or something that's super savory, or maybe it's super salty or super spicy, or it's very bland. And if you think about all of those different flavor palettes, it's really true of our emotions. Like if you have a huge crush on someone, it's almost saccharine sweet, right? Versus love, and the different states of love can have a different texture and flavor. And it's kind of unique to each one of us. Our recipes, actually all of our recipes for every emotion is unique to each one of us. But being able to compare it to food makes that relationship, one, very relatable, because you can imagine the feeling of tasting a hot, spicy pepper and relate it to being either enraged or angry. Like you can see that variation, you can understand it and relate to it. But it also doesn't make it about us. It makes it about some flavor. And when we take the sense of self out of it, it makes it less about us and more about a recipe in my head or a flavor palette. And that makes it easier for us to apply these concepts.
Well, it makes it easier for us to analyze it too.
Yep, exactly.
Interesting. Okay, now how about it can be so hot in a good way?
Well, yes, but that could be something that's super sweet, right? Like passion.
Right.
That now you might think of that as fiery, but it could people think of passion as fiery because that's just the connotation. But think about a food that you feel super strongly about. Like when I was a little girl, I loved wedding cake. Loved wedding cake. I can still remember going to a wedding, and that was the first thing I would do when we get to the reception, because I had a ton of cousins that were all much older, and it seemed like we were always going to a cousin's wedding. And I remember getting to the reception and running over to see the cake and looking at what piece I wanted when they cut it. And I was super passionate about it. So when you think about not even just a food, but something that you eat, a dish, like what are the components of that dish that you are so passionate to eat, and you feel that emotion of passion to eat it? It's not always just a single item. It could be a combination of things that make you more passionate.
Interesting. You would have loved it. When I was a kid, my mom and a group of our neighbors went down to a woman that lived right down the street from us, and she made everybody's wedding cakes. So and I learned to make the frosting and learned to make the little roses and all that good stuff. So always making somebody's wedding cake. I got sick of them. But yeah, I was like a pro at making leaves and getting the veins in the leaves just right and all that. But yeah.
Well, if I ever get married again, I know who to call.
Yeah,
but I'm never getting married again. I found a really good husband this time around.
Yeah, well, that's good. That's good. See, the formula works. So
yes, it was. It was funny because I did compare him to my list, and he was everything on my list. For the most part, he hit all the non-negotiables, and I was his list because it turned out he had a list too. So
there you go.
That was good.
That's good. So, emotion recipes in our brain. I've never ever that before until you. So, explain that to me in a little bit more detail. I sort of got that, but not entirely.
So the brain works in concepts, right?
Okay.
We don't talk about a bagel and put together every bit of the ingredients in a bagel, all the salt and the flour and the water and everything else that goes into a bagel. We don't do that. What we do is we say bagel, and it's assumed that everything's in there. Well, the brain does the same thing. It takes details of a situation, and it takes an experience, and we label it, and it stores that almost like a recipe. It's retrieved. So, for instance, Christmas and traditions for Christmas. We have an idea of Christmas based on everything that we've experienced. So when you say Christmas, you are talking about your experience with Christmas versus if I say Christmas, I have a different experience. So these stores of experiences that we have in our heads, we have labels to them. And what happens is that if we don't have enough distinction or definition to these labels that we have for our various emotions, then we launch the same emotion all the time or more often. Because the brain, when it's in a situation, you can think of the ingredients as the sensory information that the brain gets. What does it see? Who is with us? What does it hear? What are the sounds going on? Who's talking? What do they sound like when they talk? What do I smell? Is there some taste involved? I mean, all of these things are the ingredients. How do I feel inside of my body? These are the ingredients that the brain gets. So then it says, okay, when was the last time I had something similar to this? And it looks to the concepts of recipes and says, okay, and then responds accordingly. And I always use the idea of going to a bagel store and saying, here's a bagel. I want a bagel. And the person behind the counter would say, well, what kind of bagel do you want? Well, I want a bagel. Every single one of those bagels has the basic ingredients, right? But until you can define it more distinctly and say, I want an everything bagel with butter and I want it toasted, then you're going to get just probably a plain bagel every single time because you don't have enough definition and distinction between what you want and what you don't want. And that's the idea of emotional granularity.
Okay.
Did I just bore you?
No. Okay, so each past relationship we have has an emotional tab in our brain. And we have all of these memories associated. So when we say that person's name, does that come up as a recipe or granularity, or how would you describe that?
So I would call it, you could call it a recipe because you are going to pull in, because you're going to pull together all of your experiences and all of your feelings around that person. Okay. Whether they're true or not is not the issue. That's just what you've got in your head. And so we have to understand, that might not be true, could be true, but that's what we've got. So this is why when people are hurt in a prior relationship and they see any behavior that's similar in another relationship, they react to the past relationship.
Right. Okay. All right. Well, I've got this theory that we learn something about ourselves from every past relationship, good, bad, indifferent, what we want, what we don't want, all that sort of thing. But I was thinking that our brain, an emotional recipe, tied to that person's name for each relationship we've had in the past. Then I like that. Okay.
Yeah. But not even just their name and to that person, but also to experiences within that relationship.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. Because it could be just the the wave of a hand, right? And
Right.
and you're like, oh, he's gonna hit me, and they're
True.
just being demonstrative. They just are Italian or something, and their hands move a lot.
Right. True. Okay. Interesting. I like this. Okay. In the granularity and diversity. All right. So the granularity is more the elements of our recipe?
Being able to identify it in detail and with distinction. Like I said, the bagel versus just having a bagel, you can be able to describe the bagel and distinguish it from other bagels.
Okay.
Where they're all bagels, but you are able to make a distinction between them and potentially label them differently. For an onion bagel versus a garlic bagel versus an Asiago cheese bagel.
So more the specifics within a wider, broader category.
Right.
Getting down to
the more that,
okay.
Yes, because that helps. Think about yourself, like if someone gives you detailed directions or abstract directions. The more detailed you are in any situation, the better you are at identifying.
Well, if you don't get down to the specifics, it's hard to narrow in enough to be of real benefit, though, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
And you have to look at it from a standpoint for your brain, so that your label for something is detailed enough, where that concept is detailed enough. Does that make sense?
Well, that's like if you go to the doctor and you say, my body hurts. That's not real helpful.
Exactly.
The doctor goes, okay, what part of your body? Well, my body hurts. Well, yeah, I got that, but what part? Well, it hurts in the morning.
Funny enough,
it doesn't help.
What's funny, I'm so sorry, but I was going to say, what's funny enough is that the same interoceptive sense that we have to help us identify our emotions in our body, it's the same sense that tells us that we're hungry, that we're sick, that we're need to use the restroom, that we need to we're got a temperature. It's the same sense. So the more that you are able to connect to your emotions and be able to feel them in your body and identify them, the more able you are to identify your physical states too. Like, am I sick? Am I hungry? And be able to describe how you feel internally. And I will tell you, that has been like a noticeable difference for myself even.
Okay. So why do you think that people can do this with other elements of their life but not with their emotions?
Because I think that there's a lot of stigma around emotions. And there's this, people think that there's emotions that are soft or girly, and boys don't feel certain emotions when they're just information. Emotions are information that tells you and help you to decide, like, is this dangerous or is it not? Is it desirous or is it unpleasant? It's information. And the other part of it is that we, with our brain, remember our brain's a predictor, and it doesn't get its predictions right all the time. In fact, most of the time when we predict things like, oh, if I feel this, it's going to be really, really bad, we're wrong. People predict all the time, oh, this relationship is going to be great, or this, I'm going to get a great grade. And we aren't always right, but we also predict that we're going to feel more or worse, and we also rarely get that right. So the fear or the belief of our predictions kind of gets us into trouble sometimes, instead of just saying, okay, this is information, and is it Is it good information or not? And helping to learn how to distinguish that.
I was just thinking, I may be completely here, but it kind of like our intuition. Our intuition tells us things, and sometimes we ignore it because we just don't like the message we're getting.
Yeah, it's a funny thing. I was reading this book called The Secret Life of the Mind, and something else, and then the second title is The Secret Life of the Mind. But the author, who's a neuroscientist, said that an interesting thing about our intuition, and he said that in situations where we have like one choice, where we have a choice of, two cars, that, using our cognitive brain to make a choice is a good way to go. But when there's lots of information that's involved in making a decision, that it's better to go with your gut, because your brain can only consciously give you so much information at once, and that our instincts actually work better for decision making when we lean upon it. And I thought that was interesting.
I totally agree. I've learned, just go with my gut. That's the way to go. So, but I know a lot of times your gut may be telling you something that is right on target, although it may not be what you want to hear. It's the right way to go. So I was just thinking maybe that could be the problem, that your gut's giving you the right answer, but it's not the one you want. So you just ignore it. And your emotions could be the same way. They could be giving you the right answer, and you're like, but I don't like that one. So
I actually teach people. There's people might not know this, but our stomach has a brain. They call it the second brain. But there's, I think, a couple million neurons. I can't remember the number, so don't hold me to it. And our heart has a small, quote-unquote, brain, and it's got 40,000 neurons. And it's a cluster, and it behaves not exactly like our head brain, but it does behave in a brain-like fashion. And that each one of those brains can be utilized for making decisions by checking in, like, what does my heart say? What does my gut say? What does my my head say? And that when we learn to balance that we can make better decisions. There's actually a test that I share with students or people who attend my courses, that they can see like what brain that they lean upon, because we all tend to think like, okay, I'm not going to listen to my emotions because they're going to lead me wrong, when actually they don't necessarily do. And sometimes our gut instincts can lead us wrong if they're not filtered correctly. So it's just interesting. I think our human body is just fascinating.
Oh yeah, definitely. It is. It is. But yeah, I've gotten much more in tune with my body in the last 6 years, and it's learned a lot. I've definitely learned a lot.
It talks to you.
It does. It does, and I have learned I must listen to it, and if I don't, it takes control. Like when I'm not sleeping like I need to, it puts me to sleep, and I'm like, and then I wake up and go, okay, I needed rest. But it knows better than me when I need rest. Okay, so how do we take all these ideas and apply them to love?
I would ask yourself, what do you need to feel love? And that might sound very strange, but I would say go sit in a room and be very quiet, pen and paper. There's a relationship between the brain and the hand that it ignites when you write, physically write with your hand. Just ask yourself, what do you need? And even say your name. So I could sit there and say, Kim, what do you need to feel love? And then write it down. And then ask again, Kim, what do you need to feel love? And then write it down. And ask again. And keep going. this exercise could reveal some very interesting things about you and what's going on in your head. And it might not reveal everything, but it's just your brain letting you know some of the things inside that you need to feel love. And it gives you an opportunity then when you're done with the exercise, and I suggest that you go until you've exhausted and you can't think of anything. But even when you can't think of anything, just ask yourself one more time, you might be surprised. And look at that. And it might give you some ideas of where you're cooking a recipe that you don't want to cook anymore, or where you're kind of off track a bit. And so this will allow you to be more defined in your recipe for love, and also to look at the dictionary with this thesaurus to see other words that are similar but distinct, and start identifying emotional states. And I'll give you an example that I love to share with people. The word twitterpated came from the movie Bambi, and
right.
Thumper. Yeah, you remember Thumper?
I remember Thumper and twitterpated, yes.
Yep. And so that is a great visual of how you feel when you first meet someone and you're just overwhelmed. And that feeling of twitterpation is different from love. And so if you can stop yourself from going into love so quickly and be able to identify the various states of love, because love, if you look it up in the Greek language, has like 7 definitions for what we term one word, love. So if we can look for those words or different words to help us distinguish the various kinds of love and use love more finitely, something that you're passionate about. Unless you're passionate about some girl's shoes or some guy's motorcycle or car, don't use love. Use another word and see if it doesn't take on a different feeling inside of your body.
True. Yeah, people toss love out there way too frequently, I think. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't have the meaning that I think it should to way too many people. It's said way too easy about silly stuff, but just my opinion.
No, I can't agree with you more, because there's even just putting hearts on things. Comments people make. There's very little ability to have a distinction between really liking or loving, or just it's just used way too often in an inappropriate context. Yeah.
Well, and relationships are the same way to a lot of people too, but that's a whole other discussion too.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, speaking of relationships, how can we apply this to our relationships?
If you could, sorry to say this, but be more specific. In a current relationship, in a budding relationship.
Let's start with to a budding relationship, to one that's just getting started.
I would definitely look at words that you can use to describe the stages of a relationship. So when a relationship is new, I already said twitterpated, you might have even make up your own word. Like you're in the middle between love and like, so use love like, or come up with something. But you don't have to use the words out loud. It's your recipe, it's your label, and be able to distinguish the states of the relationship and have a clear definition of what love looks like, and not confuse feelings in our groin and the passion that comes with a new relationship for love, and and being able to distinguish what that is. And I think having a clear idea of who you want to be, the qualities that you want in somebody that you want to spend the rest of your life with, because as you and I both know, passion goes away, and you have what's called storage in Greek, which is this long-term kind of love. And it's what happens when the hormones die down. And so this is why understanding who you want to be in love with is very important.
True. There needs to be a step between like and love, because there is a step between those two, and it needs to be acknowledged and have a real term. People make up all these funky names for all this crazy stuff, but nobody has one for that yet. We need to come up with that.
All right. Well, you and I can work on that.
We do. We need to work on that.
Okay.
And make the people use it. Like I said, love is thrown around there way too casually, and it's taken way too casual, I think. But
yeah.
Okay. So what? Go ahead.
I was going to say, in a relationship, I think that the harder parts are our negative thoughts that we get into, right? Don't you agree?
Oh, yeah. Definitely.
Yeah. So I have a lot of advice around that, and that's in my book, The Perfect Heart, on ways that you can refocus, because our emotions, this is where becoming mindful is so key. Instead of letting our emotions drive our thoughts, by trying to use our thoughts to define like what it is that really makes us upset, but also why we chose our spouse to be our spouse, and to understand that our brain's desire to keep us healthy and alive can interfere with our healthy relationships. So by remembering and looking for the things and the qualities in our partners, which is why we chose them to begin with, can help to overcome some of the negative qualities that we see, because it's just our brain focuses on the negative because it wants to protect us.
True. Sadly, it doesn't try to protect us from the negative, but no, it is looking out for us. So that's the important.
Well, actually, it is, because it's alerting you, right? This is negative. Right. Protect yourself.
Yeah, that's true. So what are a couple pieces of advice that you can give the listeners to help them to better manage their emotions? Something to help them to be able to manage their relationships better. Because, we all get into relationships, and then things just, we get in situations, and emotions just, emotions can just get raw sometimes. We saw a lot of that during COVID. My goodness.
Exactly. I'm going to share something from my book that I found very helpful for me, and I still do it and use it. If we're in a relationship where we're having a lot of trouble, like we're around each other way more than we used to, and this is kind of going back to what I just mentioned. When we are able to pick, like, you know how the more irritated you get with someone, like everything's wrong with them, like they can't chew their food and you're not irritated. It's just how intense our negative emotions can get. So what I recommend is that you pick no more than 5, probably no less than 2 or 3 things that your partner does that gets to you, and say, I need you to work just on these things. This is what I need from you. And they do the same thing. And you come to an agreement that all you're going to do is just work on these 3 things. So if it's emptying the garbage or keeping the house clean, whoever has the other partner, they will do just that. And anything else that they do, you do not have a past to get mad at them for, because you're focused on the things that they are doing for you. And all you have to worry about are the things that you're doing for them. And it's funny how when you start to get a need met, you start to forget all of the little things that irritate you. So it's working on very specific, and this is where I go back into detailed, specific things that you can do for your partner that's not a long laundry list that feels overwhelming and unachievable, but just very focused so that you can have something that's measurable and achievable and demonstrates that you want to do something for your partner. And if your partner can't do 3 things for you, then you've got another problem, right?
This is true. This is true.
Does that one work for you?
That does. You know, I had a guest on one time, and she said that her and her husband had a preset meeting with each other every month, and I think it was on the full moon, actually. And they sat down and talked about, and they knew they were going to do this every month, and they sat down and talked to each other, and they had a set of questions they went through with each other. And for that one night, they each could bring, with no repercussions, they could each bring one thing that they wanted the other to do for them, and to make a change. They knew that no matter what they said, there wasn't going to be any repercussion. They were just, this is something that's been going on that bothers me, and I want you to do something about it. And each of them was going to have something that they were going to bring. I thought that was a good idea.
Yeah, it's similar. It's a similar idea, right? It's saying, I need this. Will you do this for me?
Yeah. And like I said, just I will
say this one couple, she wanted a massage, but that didn't work out because let's just say it didn't work out. And it needs to be something meaningful, not trivial. You know what I mean? Like something that truly makes a difference in the emotions and needs being met.
Yep. Massage is not a bad idea, though.
Well, it was someone always wanted he wanted it always to lead to sex, and she was just wanting a massage, so it caused more conflict. So just be careful what you choose is all I'm saying. It needs to be meaningful.
Yeah, that can go there. All right, so how can listeners find out more about you?
You can go to my website. It's Kim Korte, KimKorte.com.
Very good. And she has a neat video about sandwich making I think you might enjoy. I actually just found it today. And do you mind if I share the link?
No, feel free. Go ahead.
Awesome. I am going to share all of her information, and the replay for today's show will be there. And if you go to lovecoachjourney.com/emotions, it will be there. So I've thoroughly enjoyed having you with me today. We had a good conversation. You gave me some interesting things to think about. Interesting things.
I enjoyed speaking with you. You are a very thoughtful interviewer, and I appreciate that very much. You were a joy to be with this past hour.
Like I said, just interesting stuff to mull over. I always make sure I have some free time after the interviews, because there's always these new things racing through my head to think about. So, and I hope the listeners feel the same way. So,
I hope so too. And it's always nice to know that if there's something that someone heard that helped them, if they reach out to me on my site, it just makes me feel good to know that I help people, because really that's what I'm about. I mean, I need to make money, but my goal is to help make a difference in the lives of people. So if there's anything that I said or questions anyone has, they can reach out to me on my website.
Exactly. Well, that's why I have contact options on my site, and I've always got readyforloveradio@gmail.com for the same reason. I love to hear, if something sparked a comment or a thought or that kind of thing. So, so people reach out anytime. And like I said, the replay will be posted. It actually will be posted as soon as the show is over. So thank you very much for being here. And listeners, I'll be with you next time on Ready for Love Radio.